Hello, everybody. It's Randall's Cunningham setting in for Howie tonight on the Northeast Alabama softball show. Phil, I won't pretend like I'm not better looking and smarter than Howie, but I will go ahead and turn it over to you. That way, everybody won't know if I am or not.
Well, we want to, of course, welcome in Coach Joe Guthrie, year number two, and I guess it's down to 9 days now. It's getting a little bit exciting.
Yeah, we're I think we're pretty well ready to go. I mean, it's been, we had a little break, a little bit of a break in the weather. But our bunch came back as ready as I've had a group probably in at least 10 years. We have a chance to do some special things if we, continue to focus on, improving uh, and just getting better individually and as a team. But it's a real fun group to be around. It's pretty easy to trust them when you turn your back. They're going to be doing the right things and they want to be great. So, we're excited. It's just been, I think as a staff, it's been, a lot of fun. It's just, you're just ready to go at this point. And like I told them today, every team I've ever had, when you get real close, there's always this, you're kind of tired of practice and ready to go. But they've stayed focused on, the things that we have to, that are kind of boring that we have to buy into if we're going to do what we need to do. And, we went through a lot of fundamentals today, defensively and offensively, and that was good and it was sharp. And we didn't have to waste a whole lot of time, doing what we needed to do. So it's just an efficient, business-like group, and we're excited about it for sure.
Well, Coach, going into year two, it has to be a lot easier on the staff and the players too, because they know what to expect. And like you said, they have worked on things on their own. So y'all can kind of sort of concentrate on fine tuning things, maybe doing a little more fundamental stuff, a little more teaching, a little more working on which is important in softball timing. You can put a little more emphasis on that more than you do have to teach.
Yeah, I think we're always teaching, but yeah, it's definitely in year two. We just have, it's a higher standard staff that I think attracts higher standard players. And when you get those two elements together, you should be able to hit some pretty lofty goals. So, Saban said it a long time ago. I agree with this. The mediocre people are always going to come in conflict with the high achievers. I have my entire life. It's not something that I really worry about a whole lot. And I think that, you just try to get the type of people in that complement you, that want to achieve, high standards. And we certainly are pleased with what we have. The big thing now will be, we know that they can play. We know that they're teachable. How do we all respond to adversity? The adversity that our game will absolutely have send it to us going forward. So, we're trying to prep for that as best we can and go from there, because it'll be a challenging season for sure.
And kind of what you're speaking on. And, I spoke to Jimmy Colitis also. You know, you're not going to compromise on your standard. You're not going to lower your expectations or lower your level down to a player or individual, not just player, that has a lower standard. You want them to come up to your standard, and you're going to push for that.
Yeah, and I feel like, just getting into when we started this, I mean, the thing that attracted me to Northeast was what they had put into the program. The vision was, in my mind, I mean, some people scoffed at, one of our introductory meetings we had publicly. They're like, he says they want to win a national title. Well, I kind of feel like that's an obvious statement. And that really starts before me. And if you look at how they designed and built, the facilities we have, I think that starts with Dr. Campbell and Nathaniel Ledbetter and guys that were in on this before I ever got involved. But I can certainly say one of the reasons that I got involved and I'm proud to be leading it is because of that high standard. And that just keeps coming on down, from the legislature to the president, to the administrators, to the coaches, to the players. And, one of the things I've learned the longer I've been doing this, you don't win a championship solely on players or on coaches. All of those elements that I mentioned have to be congruent. When we were in the collegiate league this summer, I had a GM, Tommy Santiago, that is very similar, on the same page with me in terms of personnel and how we want to do things. And, that ended up in a championship. And I think the same thing is true here. You've just got to have those like-minded people. And when that starts at the top, it's going to trickle down everywhere else. And, it's harder to do now because very few things are geared toward team type of orientation and people sticking together and having to ride out adversity to win to get where they need to go. That really isn't what is put in front of people today. So it makes it challenging, but I think what you see is some of the best kids today are as good as probably we've ever had. And in part, I think because of all the distractions and all the stuff they have to deal with. We had a team meeting today about that. That just it's more difficult to do things that probably I took for granted growing up. Discipline is not cool. Being a great teammate is not cool. Staying at a place, for more than 5 minutes is not cool. I don't even know what you call the landscape of college athletics now. If that's what we're calling it, I don't really know how to describe that. But in junior college and at our place, that's certainly, still there. And so we're trying to be appreciative of that and cultivate that as much as we can, for sure. So it's been a fun ride. We're just, we're eager to, get in and get rolling from there, for sure.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Today's athletics, and of course, it's society. Not a whole lot of focus is being put on loyalty, and that's a big thing when you go to a school. I mean, you want to wear that Northeast sweatshirt with pride, and you wear it for the entire 2 years you're there, and you're committed to that project.
Well, and it's like we've got some kids that that had Division I, like multiple kids had Division I scholarships prior to coming here. We have the Georgia Gatorade Player of the Year on our roster. These kids came here for the most part because they wanted to get better. They're committed. That I always say the original transfers are the JCs, and and all this transfer language that we have that we're inundated with today. The Northeast and junior college in general represents the ones that go for the right reasons. Maybe you're not where you kind of want to be academically, or you're not quite where you want to be physically. Well, you work to get where you need to go. And that's the beauty of junior college. I'm a junior college product. Very proud of that part of my journey, both, coaching and playing. It's one of the reasons I came here. And I think, it's what we're kind of discussing with a lot of coaches at the 4-year level, because, we're trying to find some homes with, our kids that are going forward. And we've gotten some real good feedback. But, our kids are coming here and doing these things for the right reasons. And not to sound arrogant, but, our entire staff had a lot of success in Division I. And, it's unique from that standpoint because it's not like we don't know how or we forgot how. And a player that comes through our system is going to have they're going to have a leg up from anybody else, because there just aren't. I don't know any other junior college staffs that have that kind of experience. So, it's a different thing for our kids coming through. So I think that those are things that, the schools need to take heed on. And it's tough for them. Some of them do see that, but they've got a log jam of players right now because we can't figure out I don't know. I may have eligibility. I was pondering that the other day. I may have eligibility now, because apparently everyone does. So I don't know, what constitutes, somebody having their clock or not having their clock, or it's a joke to me, and it's embarrassing. From the standpoint of somebody that's in college athletics, that we can't lead any better than this. It really is. It's an absolute travesty and embarrassment at this point. Yeah. I've tried to be diplomatic about it, but it really is. And the shame of it is that I think since COVID, it has there have been a lot of high school kids that have lost opportunities because we can't figure this out. And I'm really losing my patience with where we are as an industry in college athletics for what we should be doing, because everybody that's been involved in it loves it, I think. I mean, there's so many things that have been great about it. I owe a lot to college athletics, but to see where it is now is we have got to do some things to change this at every level. Fortunately, at the junior college level, you're less tainted by this than you are at others, and I know that because I've been at all of them. But this is it is about time somebody needs to put a foot down and fix this. It really is, and so I hope we can do that, because if we don't, I think you're going to see maybe a runaway train in a bad, in a bad way you may see some sports go away. You may see, schools that can't compete with the money doing this at like a club level. I mean, there's some real doomsday scenarios if we don't figure this out. So I don't think anybody wants to see that. I think, there's so many things that college athletics does for not only Olympic sports, but just character building in general, that I think we're robbing a generation of student athletes on. So, I blame the adults, not the kids.
Absolutely.
It's just not we've got to do better. But anyway, I got on my soapbox there because there's been so much going on lately that I'm just like, it's hard for me to keep my mouth shut on it. So anyway, but we're excited about the season. We got some good kids going forward, and looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, to kind of sort of close that off, a person posted something the other day. He said, we are on the verge of bankrupting college athletics. Yeah. And that's exactly what's going to happen. And it's all going to come crashing down on everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I think we're in a better spot where we are in the 2-year system, because number one, we don't have to deal with the NCAA, which is, I am very glad of. The other piece of it is, though, that again, you're going to attract, and certainly that's true on this team, a type of kid that is coming in that just wants to get better. And that's who I would be hunting for if I were on the other side of the equation now. Not somebody that is just there to see how they get paid, just there to see what kind of deal they can broker and then head somewhere else. And look, I get it. We all look out for ourselves in some way or another. I get that. I mean, that's business. But they're also, in any legitimate business, you've got to have rules enough to where sometimes the rules save you from yourself. So some of the stuff I've seen now, it's hard for me to even come up with adjectives to describe it. So we'll see. But I am glad, on the other side of that we've got this bunch here that, that are fun to be around every day. And it reminds me of, the way things were before this circus started. So, we're pretty fortunate from that standpoint.
Coach, let me jump in. You have pure athletes, and that's something that doesn't exist at the next level either. And it's allowed junior colleges to expand at a high rate, while we see 4-year large Division I schools struggle with the direction. And my daughter's a recruit for the flag football, and most of those programs that's been created is at the junior college level. Mm-hmm. So we see the junior college growing, thriving, while the next level maybe not. So I applaud y'all.
I think we're fortunate. I appreciate it. I mean, I think it goes beyond just the coaches. I think we've got, good administrators, and, when you're staying, you're trying to keep something in mind that, for me, I went to the University of Kentucky and I wasn't ready. And I had junior college as a kind of a bounce back, a building block more or less. And then I ended up at Alabama after that. And I was, injuries ended up getting me, but I was certainly more prepared academically and athletically, going through there. And I've always been grateful to that experience. I think that's one of the best things that we've ever done in the state. And it's not just our state. There are other states that do a really good job, but we have gotten away from, things like just all kind of stuff, regional rivalries and these huge conferences. You can get in a conference and you can honestly be a pretty mediocre team and not play the stronger teams in the conference, and you get rewarded for that. And then meanwhile, you got a mid-major team that, is just struggling to stay in the black, through a year. And the money now it's such a gap between those guys and
It
the
is.
highest level. It's just really kind of ridiculous. But you're also seeing, I think there's a commodity in players that may be buying these guys that are supposedly highly talented, or or have X, Y jersey, across their back and on their resume, isn't necessarily the way to go. And you need to start looking at this from a different way. Is how much is character worth? That's another question that obviously, like in Indiana football, is answered. Those, they got some high character guys on that team
Yeah.
that aren't necessarily the greatest athletes. Is that worth something? I think it is. You get a guy, that famous Bear Bryant speech that goes on, and on YouTube, that he talks about a guy that's, maybe talent wise is a 75, and you got another guy that's a talent wise an 85, but the 75 guy outworks and outplays him that day. Well, all of a sudden, the whatever gap that existed prior to that is pretty close, if not better, on the guy that was scored lower. And that was kind of breaking down in a nutshell how he thought, and that was true then, and I still think it's true.
Absolutely.
So I just think we're missing in all the money and all the hype and all the all this stuff that's out there now that has a lot of dollars behind it. There are still a lot of kids and there are a lot of coaches out there that's not where they're necessarily going. And we tend to tell the stories nowadays, and this is one of the things I appreciate about you guys, because in mainstream media you don't get this. All the mainstream stories are, really representative about 1% to 5% of the actual population in terms of colleges that this is really affecting. The other 95 to 99%, they don't have the money to be able to operate the way that these new rules are. So they're not changing, their business, their day-to-day business, as drastically as some of the others. And, there's a lot of things you worry about. Or where does this put the fans? Where does it put the growth of the sport? Is it a growing model, period? I would challenge that. So I don't know that, again, it's like when you make a rule and it may have been something that helps out, the very wealthiest few in terms of talent. I don't think that the byproducts of it are helping a lot of other people. And it's even beyond, it's really not, I hate to throw the NCAA in this totally, because it's the courts that have kind of broken up the NCAA's ability to enforce it. And that's really where the worst part of it is. So, and it's changing so fast, it's hard to be able to adapt to what's the next, what the next move is. But, yeah, I know most of the people that I talk to in the business, whether they say it publicly or not, are pretty distraught over it. And, like I said, I'm just thankful I am where I am. But, I'm a fan of the game and a custodian of the game, just like anybody else, and that's in the business. And it bothers me what you're saying, for sure.
Yeah, hey, I understand. Because getting into your thing, I want to ask you this about recruiting. When you're scouting a young lady, you're going to watch them play. I mean, there's a lot of great softball players out there. What are some of your criteria? What are you looking for while they're competing on the field?
Well, I mean, on the physical side, we look at tools, arm strength, speed, the ability to hit for power. If they're somebody on the circle, obviously we're looking for, somebody that can, if they have a dominant pitch and an off speed, those are kind of the simple ways we're looking at it. Are they projectable, in terms of, is that as high a ceiling as they've got, in terms of their ability, or is this kind of where they are? That's something that, we've learned to evaluate, I feel like, a little bit better over time. But the other thing is kind of how committed they are. They've got to play at a high. We're recruiting kids to be 100% honest. We are looking for kids that we feel like can play at a minimum at the D2 level, but we're looking as high as we can. It's a Division I level. Right now, the way things are, where they've got gluttoned rosters, at the 4-year level, there's going to be a lot of players that could easily, play for just take, for example, when I was the head coach at UAB, they could play for that kind of level competition there just aren't the opportunities out there anymore. I talked to a Power 4 coach the other day, and he said, we're going to grab one kid out of high school. The rest of them are all portals.
Oh, my Lord.
And that's not much different, honestly, at the mid-major level. Now, fortunately for us, I think we have the ability with the staff, the resources, the talent that we brought in are going to continue to bring in, because we're not recruiting really what I would call junior college kids. We're not. We're recruiting kids that are overlooked, that we feel like, if you look at our group now, we beat, and again, we've got a ways to go to prove this yet, in terms of spring, but I feel like we will. But, we beat Louisiana Tech. We beat Sanford. We beat Georgia Tech, all those within 7 innings on this team right now. That's in an era of NIL and all that stuff. There's no reason why that should happen. And people will go, well, it's the fall, and it's the fall for us too. And I'm pretty sure nobody's trying to lose those games.
Amen.
So, so what I'm getting at is they're out there. Those kids are out there. You've got to cast a wide net, and we want somebody that's really, really has those tools that I mentioned, but they've got to be committed at a pretty special level to get those better. That's the difference. They've got to stay committed that way. And that's tougher these days to find, because everything is kind of slated out there toward not rewarding that. It's more toward, okay, you got ranked and you've got a cute social media profile and you play with a team that, that has bids to get into this travel tournament. And that's fine. Some of that is good. But at the end of the day, we need grinders, with some talent that we feel like can project at the highest level, and that allows us to do some things that we've done and we feel like we're going to do, in this program. So that's kind of what we're looking at for sure.
Well, Coach, tell me this: when it gets to that point to where you sit down with a student athlete, find out what they're about, is that a big part of the evaluation process, is to hear what they have to say, find out how committed they are?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I was talking to a coach of mine, friend of mine, our deal is, we were talking about, what could potentially, red flags on a recruiting visit. And, what we try to do, you see a lot of programs that'll come out there and, they'll have them try on the uniforms and they'll sit with their trophies. And I just don't, as a former student athlete, that never appealed to me. What I wanted to know was, how are you guys invested in getting me better, and here's how I am invested in getting your program better. That was really what I was about. And I feel like that anywhere that I've been, or anybody that I've ever been around that's had success, that's kind of it's a business, like, let's get down to, let's make your visit answer questions that you took the time out of your day to come see us that you want answered, and not a bunch of fluff. Because I feel like that's kind of insulting and a waste of their time. That's the way I look at it. That being said, I'm not averse to telling people. I've told people in visits, this may not be for you, to be honest with you. The way that here's what we're looking for. Here's where you're kind of emitting where you are, and those two things may not marry up, and that's okay. You may be a great player somewhere else, but you just don't fit us. And we're looking for, again, when you're setting your standards high, sometimes that happens. And, that's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean that player isn't a good player. It doesn't mean they're not a good person. But you've got to be real specific about what you're trying to bring in. Relative to your core values and your ball club, because otherwise you're wasting your time and the other person. So that's really what we try to do, is be as honest as we can about what we're about. That way they can make a good decision, and so can we. and then go from there for sure.
Yeah, no smoke and mirrors, just, transparency and gloves off, and program, in a sense, sell itself.
Yeah, I think so. We just try to get an idea. We show them, here's what we value, and the biggest thing is trying to get out of them without fluff. What are you about? Does this pique your interest? Are you really, if you come here, you're going to work. Is that something you want to do? If it is interesting to you, this is probably a good fit. If it's not, might as well try and get that evaluation out as much as we can now and save everybody the trouble. Because I think there's a lot of missteps in recruiting right now, because people are just, number one, there's some desperation, out of high school, because you've got, like I said, it's a gluttonous market right now with it. So people are just kind of so-and-so's got an open, let's get them there. They still got to be a good fit. So, and that's not just us, that's anywhere. And so, we're trying to avoid, especially as we move forward, because we feel like we've got a good bunch now. You've got to, break the eggshells to make an omelet, early on. But after that, I feel like, we've had real good continuity from here. And so, we want to make sure that we owe it to the players that have paved the way to continue to have that standard. And I think that's a problem you see everywhere now is, standards aren't really, they're just not really adhered to anywhere that we are. And I think that's part of the problem we've got, societal, but also in college athletics. And, we just don't want to do that. We want to have, high standards and hit them for sure.
Yeah, don't want to just roll a team out there. I understand that.
Yeah.
We're talking about this year's team, of course, and we talked this on the air, but weather always this time of the year is an issue. But you do have a good enough indoor facility. You do get a lot of work done.
Yeah, we do. And our team too are kind of one of the things we were looking at as the staff is one of the dumbest things we could do with a team that's deep and talented is, run them into the ground early. And, we're going to challenge them when they're there, but we're also, our kids, by the time we got up to the weather break this weekend, I think we're a little sore and tired, and, it's probably a well-deserved, 3 days. We're very fortunate though that, if we're outside, we can pretty much be outside unless it is just dumping on us during the duration of the time that we were going to practice. Anything short of that, we're probably good on any kind of weather break. Now, if it's extremely cold, like it's been lately, we have the ability inside that facility to do a lot of things. A lot of things. And part of it is the space, part of it is the technology. I think Jimmy and Courtney have done a really good job of integrating, with whether it's the Rapsodo on the pitching side or the Proteus on the hitting side. We're doing some things that very few, programs at any level, have access to technology. It's really helped our players. For us as coaches, we fight about that because it's certainly not the way we learned a little bit. But, it's like Courtney was saying the other day. She goes, I don't know how big a fan I really personally am of Rapsodo, but the kids love it. And I'm like, well, good. Because that's the whole point. They need to have something that, is in their world that allows them to learn. So it's been a big positive there. It's been a big positive on a lot of the camps we ran, over the winter. So we're just fortunate to have the support because you're looking at, I think we've got about $200,000 worth of tech, in there, and that's just the tech side. And that's major league type stuff. So it's a pretty cool investment that Dr. Campbell has made, and certainly we're going to take advantage of that.
Definitely. Hey, I understand that. Any edge you can get with these young people to keep them interested naturally. Well, Coach, you kind of spoke on this. Do you kind of evaluate your staff is, kind of to know when to, and you kind of spoke on this, when to kind of back away and let them kind of use what you've taught them and developed on their own, kind of sort of while you observe?
We may have lost coach.
Yeah, he just went. I wonder if he got a call. He may have gotten a call.
Yeah, let's give him a minute to come back in.
Somebody probably called him or texted him, more than likely.
Bill, I think what he said is just fascinating. Something we have talked about. We're both season ticket holders at a Power Four school, and you start to. It almost takes suspending belief in how much money the players are making.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and the thing is, you get to a ball game, you don't even know who anybody is anymore.
That's true.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Coach, we
Yeah.
got you.
Okay. Sorry about that. There was a call coming in. I thought I canceled it and it threw everything out of whack. So
Knocked you
we
off.
were sitting there
Phil
talking
called
about
it.
$200,000 worth of technology, and yeah,
Oh, yeah.
no, no matter how much we get, it didn't solve that crisis. So
Well, kind of what I was asking, is about where coaching staffs, you teach, you develop, but at some point you kind of back away and kind of let them develop on their own, rather than just be over their head all the time.
yeah, like I think Jimmy does a really good job. We're fortunate in our staff that I think the people that do the specific jobs on the team, it fits their personality well. Jimmy's a really good teacher. He's the guy that I think just about anybody's comfortable going to. He does, and he's with the hitting side of it. And I think hitting, you've got to have somebody that is almost like a part-time psychologist, because it's really difficult to do. There are a lot of moving pieces. There's no one way to do it. And you've really got to understand the players you're dealing with. That being said, there are some things technologically that we've started doing the last 5 to 7 years that I don't think we would ever dreamed of doing 20 years ago, that are really, we use it as a way to just sort of plug into them. But I think Jimmy does a real good job of kind of letting them fail, to also giving them feedback. And then on the flip side, Courtney kind of has to do both. You've got an 8-person pitching staff, which is a lot in our sport. So she's almost at times dealing with a team unto itself. So she can be kind of hard, and then a little bit softer at times. She kind of has to do both. I do the defense and the base running. Obviously I'm in charge of all of it, but that's where I spend a lot of my time, and that needs to be somebody who's a grinder. Every little thing, we've got to be able to play defense and base run, in my opinion, every single day. There will be days that pitching is not good. There are going to be days where hitting is not good. But defense and base running, to me, that's the gimme. That's the charity deal. If we're not doing that correctly, then we're giving the game away. And that requires a little bit more grind. That being said, I will pawn off the defense at times to those two so that they're not just, getting slammed every day with me. But it's difficult to play defense for us. We're very high detailed, high focused, but we feel like that's what the game demands. So I feel like you've got that mix, between all three, and it's always worked well for us at various levels. The fact that all three have been Division I head coaches and had success helps, because there's a trust factor there. So we don't, there's just not a lot of staff dissension or anything like that. We did, which I've had in the past. So it's really nice, showing up to work, dealing with people that, you want to deal with. So, that's a positive. And I think our kids kind of benefit from having that diversity a little bit.
Yeah, well, and I think, Coach, I don't know if you kind of sort of implement this, but what I watch especially a baseball, softball, and the defensive side of the ball, timing is everything. Being in the right place at the right time, and that comes with repetition, and seeing everything that's in front of you and trusting everything that's in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of break up our teach, really in all aspects of what we do. To you got the mechanical side of it, which is sort of individually based, and that's the things like on a day like today that we can spend time kind of in a lab setting, more or less, dealing with some things. But when we get to game time or we get to live time, that really doesn't have as much significance. And kids, how you teach that and how you organize that is really significant, because a lot of times coaches and players will make mistakes of thinking the mechanical aspect of it needs to be applied at game speed. And when they do that, you're going to, basically catch what I call paralysis by analysis. You're just not going to be non-functional because you're thinking about things that you just don't have time to think about at game speed. So we spend a lot of time on the situational side. Like I had that talk with our group before we broke last week about, where we've been the last couple months, as opposed to where we're going now. We've probably been 80% on mechanics, 20% on the situational stuff. Where we're about to switch, now that we're going into games and, is the opposite. It's about 80% situational and 20% mechanics when you get into the season. So, we spend an awful lot of time making sure that all the little details are covered, on that end. And that is something that, a generation ago, when I was coming up, I had some really, really good, high detailed professional mentors at all phases of where I've been. And that was kind of considered the norm, having situational awareness, those kind of aspects. And I think that is kind of the situational side of it has hit kind of a backseat in softball because we have a whole generation of coaches that solely believes that tech is, if it's not on a tech tablet, it doesn't matter. And I think that's really foolish. I think it's also foolish not to use the tech at all. I think that there's no reason why you can't use old school wisdom and new school tech to teach a new generation how to play the game better. And so we try to do all of those things that we're incorporating it into. And it does take some learning and getting better at things that we, and challenging some things that you thought that you've known for a long time to be true. But that's part of growth, as you get better. And, but I think that in a way kind of sets us apart, having that kind of, basis of knowledge from old school, because it seems to be disappearing a lot now. Everybody kind of wants, a number or a video or something like that to give you a direct relationship to success. And some of that is good, but that's not going to help you with a runner at third and less than 2 outs. And a very simple thought and approach, in my opinion, will overcome a lot of that stuff. So, those are things that, that I think you pick up on as you've been in the game for a while.
Yeah, and I think, sometimes you get great players and you kind of sort of have to erase some of the things they've been taught, break them down, and then build them back up. Because, sometimes they are great athletes, but maybe have been taught bad habits, and that happens a lot of times. I can remember when Jim Kirby was my football coach, and going back to what you were saying, if you ever thought you were in trouble, he would let you know, you don't think. When you think you're wrong, that's why we practice. You learn to react. You don't think. You believe in what's in front of you. And he was a big thing on that. When you said I thought, you was going to get an earful.
Yeah. And hopefully we've done a good enough job where they've got a primary solution and a secondary solution. That's what we're trying to do. And there's about 12 million scenarios, situational scenarios in softball. And we're lucky if we can get live 100 looks of those in most practice. So it takes a long time, and a lot of different variables to master the game. And I still feel like I'm doing it. I've been doing it a long time. So yeah, but it's a fun journey. And it's, if you've got kids that believe in one another and believe in themselves and believe in what you're trying to do, like we have this year, it's a lot of fun. And so that's been a good, I feel like every day they show up, they're trying to give us our best, and they're engaged in, what we're trying to teach to get better. So, that's been a positive for sure. And, we're excited about that.
Well, Coach, going into this season, kind of give us a synopsis of what this team's about. What are their strengths? What are some of the things that y'all been working on to try to improve? I know it's kind of hard to tell by the fall season because the competition was really, really good, and sometimes hitting struggles. And so now that you'll see that junior college level pitching, your hitters should thrive. I don't always, it's not always the case. But confidence level hitting is going to be big for this team.
Yeah, I thought that was I thought hitting continued to improve throughout the fall. The schedule was set up to challenge what I thought was going to be a talented group. I was not, wrong on that. They've continued to get better since we got going. So I think you're going to see a pretty potent offense. Offense last year was not something we were bad at. We had a pretty solid offense last year. There were things that we were deficient on, but I didn't think that was a weakness at all. But this offense really has a chance to get going. We've got a mix of speed, power. We have the potential of being really balanced. Defensively, we have that capability with multiple lineups. To be as good a defensive team as I feel like anybody in the country. We showed that this fall. And then pitching is deep. We've got some kids that can spin the ball up, like an Addie Edwards or an Aaron Harrelson. And then we've got, Briley Weber's had a really good offseason. It'll be interesting to see how she continues to put pieces of what's a really good, down ball together. She's a big kid, over 6 feet tall, spins the ball down really well. And Hallie Haynes is a left-handed pitcher, kind of gives us a different look with a really, really good curveball into righties. But those kids are still developing. They may be, a one-trick pony out of the pen this year, or, if they continue to develop, do something else. And then obviously we got some veterans in Cheyenne Parker and Kaylee Warnock and Skylar Branch. Branch in particular has had a good fall and a really good January so far, and so have the others. There's some positives in there. Chloe Helton, again, is still learning as a freshman. Really good changeup. So we've got a lot of different looks, in the circle, and then behind the plate, we're really deep. I mean, Fran Lump that came to us from Memphis is a really good player. I mean, she can catch and throw. She's got a lot of power. She's a really good player. And then Marty McCluskey, who will be back there some, is a really talented freshman. I mean, she can play there. She can play first. She can play short. She can play third. She can run. She's got. It just takes the polish. Really, is where we're at with that. And then Savannah Cantrell is another big physical kid that swings the bat well. She works. She works really hard at what she's doing. She's got a chance to help us. And then at third, McCluskey will be over there some. Austin McNeese has improved greatly defensively. We knew she could hit, but she's really taken her defense to another level, in the offseason. Olivia Acuff will give us some time over there, and then at short, Morgan Perkins is just a really dynamic athlete, that's from Scottsboro, really good player. Her offense has really improved, from when we stopped in late October, early November to now, just really a lot of improvement. We know she can defend, but that part has really gotten better. Emery Burke, that bounced back to us from UAB. I mean, that's another one. She can play pretty much any infield position. Strong arm, swings the bat well, a lot of improvement, since we started. And then Acuff will be over at second some. Ileana Flores from Houston, has improved a lot. Really started to pick up her work ethic. The second half of the year. And then we've got veterans in Jada Hampton and Emma Heineman, at first base. Sierra Walding's going to play over there some. They're all sophomores. So, we've got some veteran leadership there. And then just a really talented outfield. I mean, Kylie Weston, who hit over 400 for us last year, is in center. Lorelei Sullivan from Georgia is another really, really good player that's still figuring it out, in center. We'll also play the corners too. And then, Bree Wilson, that's from Georgia. She's just a really talented kid, throws well, runs, is one of maybe the fastest kid we got. Still, I call her kind of the baby deer at times, because there's times where she looks like she's skating like a baby deer would on ice. And then there's times where, she's a racehorse all of a sudden. You'll see, you see that, you see the potential there. She's worked really hard. She's very coachable, a lot of athletic ability. And then Chloe Hatch comes back to us. That was an all-region player, in left field. And then, like I said, Sierra Walding will be out there some. Pearl Bellamy's going to be out there some, who's from Skyline. So it's a pretty deep group. Um, and there's not a lot of difference between, we got 25 kids. There's not a lot of difference between player 1 and player 25. And that's been the biggest thing that probably is different is, it's hard to grab a team where you've got that kind of close competition. And we remind them of that all the time. It's like, I can scream and yell all day, but really it doesn't matter as much as if you just turn around and look at who's next to you. If you're not doing what you think should be maximum effort here, somebody's going to catch you on this field. And you don't need me to tell you that. We've got some really good players. So that I think has helped us a lot. And, we're looking forward to that for sure, to continue to cultivate that.
Well, Coach, you talk about that 1 through 25. The way the conference sets up and the way your games are played, a lot of times you play a doubleheader on Thursday and a doubleheader on Saturday. You don't have everyday players like you would in baseball or if you played, more single games. You've got doubleheader. So 1 through 25 is important because you've got interlocking pieces you've got to plug in according to who you're playing.
Yeah, and it helps having what I would call Swiss Army knives a little bit. We've got some kids that are pretty versatile, that can play a lot of positions. That helps us, piece together different looks that we need. We've been able to practice that way, which I think helps. And then we're the biggest thing is when you're deep behind the plate and in the circle, it just helps. Going into a year where you don't feel like you're going to stress any one player out. And we've got some kids that are going to get some time, especially early, that'll take some of the load off some of our players, that are a little more veteran, early on. So that allows us with that schedule, playing 56 games, we're playing about, I think it's 24 that are non-conference early. That's a pretty decent number for us to kind of figure some things out early. So it gives some people some opportunities. Absolutely.
Well, Coach, talk about, in the conference you're in, the Alabama Community Collegiate Conference. Who are some of the teams in that conference that we're going to see, and who are the ones that have been the most successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as competitive as it's been in a while. You've had some shakeup with some places. Wallace State certainly had a good year last year, finished in third in the country. They return a lot of players. They're going to be good. Southern Union had a great year for those guys last year. They finished, I think, in the top 20. So they did lose some people, but there's also some kids that haven't forgotten how to win on that roster. Coastal South down in Bay Minette is always good. That's just a good area for talent. They'll be good. Gadsden State, obviously, that's right down the road. I think, Ryan works as hard as anybody on the recruiting side. They've got, David Russo's an outstanding coach that he hired as an assistant, that did a great job for years at Wallace Dothan on the softball side. And then he was, a lot of people forget, he was with Jeff State baseball before that, just a very talented veteran coach. And, that speaks a lot to Ryan that, as a young guy, taking over a college program for the first time. A lot of these people would, they would not do that. They would go hire somebody that maybe is just a yes person. And he's hiring somebody that I think, has that wisdom. And I'm not saying Ryan doesn't know what he's doing, because I think he does. But, hiring somebody that, has been there a while, especially when you're young, I think shows some wisdom kind of behind your years. So they're going to be good. He does a good job. I have a lot of respect for those guys. Tracy over at Sneed, he was with Wallace for many, many years. They're always good. That team, I don't care what his roster says, he'll do a good job and have them, going where they need to go. And then, Calhoun made a coaching change, this year. They had a guy, Denton Bowling, that's had, real good success at the high school level. And I expect him to, I've seen his high school teams play before. I expect him to be good. Northwest Shoals had a real good year last year. They return a kid that I think is a Division I pitcher. Shelton, returns at least one that I think is a Division I pitcher, maybe two. So they'll be good. They usually always are. I don't think I'm leaving anybody out on there. We've got about, counting us, you've got 9 members, most of whom are in, the north to central area of the state, with the exception of Coastal South being at Bay Minette. They're kind of the outlier. But it'll be competitive. We're in the process of, making, and we've always had a 20-team World Series and, 16, 20-team World Series. That national tournament is going to change starting in 2028, where we're going to start doing basically a regional seeding model. You're going to have 32 teams basically in. It provides a little more opportunity for postseason appearances, but your World Series will be smaller and a little more selective, which I kind of like that. I think it's a long time coming, for us. So we're kind of in the process the next 2 years of transitioning toward that. And, I sit on a couple of those committees, so I'm kind of curious to see how it all shakes out. But there's a lot of good people on those committees, and I'm glad that they were courteous enough to let me sit on it. So, but a lot of big changes that I think are coming in a good way for us, for sure.
Well, Coach, one good thing about having a lot of familiarity with the schools, because most of us has heard about the schools that you're going to play, is it's going to be easy to develop rivalries, and that creates a lot of interest in fans.
Yeah, and we've stepped out of, we know we've got a competitive conference, and part of it they're putting in kind of an RPI type format, for national tournament selection. So we have beefed up our I don't think we have a game on our schedule that you can sleep on at all. We open up with a really good Marion Military Institute team, then we play Central Alabama, and they're technically what you would call Division II junior colleges, but the gap between Division II and Division I and junior college is not what it is, at the 4-year level. And those teams both used to be D1 schools, and they're very good. So I think that's a good deal. And then we've got McLennan that comes in right after that from Texas, who will be ranked in the top 5, who's very, very good. We're going to play them 3 times at our place. We'll play Vol State, that's perennially ranked in the top 25. We'll go to their place in Tennessee. We'll play Rome State, that, Marty McDaniel, that was at Tennessee forever, who I think does an outstanding job. We'll go play those guys. And Walter State up there, who's been in the World Series, I think as recently as 2 years ago. So we're playing some of the best groups in Tennessee. We played Georgia Highlands, who had a good year last year. So a lot of those teams, both nationally and regionally, we are going to get a chance to play as a kind of a precursor to what is going to be a very daunting and challenging, conference schedule for sure.
Well, and Coach, I guess you stepping out and playing a quality schedule. Now what you're talking about, an RPI deal to get into that World Series. If you don't win your conference, there's no guarantee you're going to get in. So you have to play quality people. No,
and you're right, and it. Right now, based on, and it's mostly, but we had a nice year last year. I think having 2 teams in the national tournament, 2 teams that were in the top 15, one that was in the top 5 helps our case, going into this year for at-large bids, bids coming out of our league. Texas and Florida for the past 10 to 15 years have really dominated the national scene, particularly Florida. So, we've got to play those type teams to, kind of, try to level that out a little bit and create some national exposure, not only for us, but for our league. So, we're jumping right in that, with both feet. Absolutely.
Coach, I know there's a lot of interest in Northeast softball. Of course, that has come out. I shared where, you can buy season tickets. I'm sure there's single game tickets available. Of course, you go on the road to Marion Military Institute on Thursday the 5th, but on 7th, you've got doubleheader 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock against that same Marion Military Institute. So it's an exciting time for Northeast softball. It's going to be a little cold, but it should be an enjoyable way to start the season. And I'm sure you are expecting good crowds, because this is an exciting time for Northeast.
Yeah, it is. And, we're certainly excited about it. And hopefully, no matter what the temperature is, it can't be any worse than the Saturday previous to that one. Yeah. So it may feel like it's 80 degrees, so we're excited about it. And, we've had great turnouts. We had great turnouts in the fall. So we're, this is a very unique community in terms of being softball friendly and for a lot of good things, but particularly it doesn't hurt that the community is very warm to softball. I mean, we train people as far away as Illinois on a regular basis in that facility, but we've got obviously a real loyal following that stays in the 2-county area that we have in pitching and hitting and defense. And, that we're just real excited about how we can do those things for the communities for sure. And that's going to do nothing but pay it forward for our sport and for our program, moving on.
Well, tell me this, the first game is on the 5th. Kind of what is the day's plan to go to Marion? I know y'all board the bus, you'll have a pregame meal, and you'll play down there and return home. But kind of how does that day unfold?
Yeah, I mean, we'll roll down there and, get off the bus, stretch, hit, go through pregame and get ready to roll. It's a nice spot because, it's about a 3-hour trip. It's kind of in the middle of the state. And, it's something that I'm obviously real familiar with because I spent the first 6 years of my college coaching career down there. It's good. We played down there in the fall. So, our kids are familiar with that venue and, it'll be a good day. I mean, they will have played, I think 2 games on the 3rd, so they'll have a couple games under their belt. But both teams will be very familiar with each other, having played, in the fall. We played them 4 times. Obviously, they have that same amount of data on us. But yeah, looking forward to it. Marion's kind of an interesting place because there's a lot of history down there. Our state is kind of diverse. In terms of that's the Black Belt area down there, kind of the old agrarian area, and that school is the oldest military junior college in the country. So there's a lot of historical. I showed them last time we went down there and played. We did it. At the end of it, I showed them the grounds there. I don't know if you guys have ever been down there, but the chapel was an old military hospital for both Confederate and Union soldiers. And
wow,
it predates the Civil War. If you look at the old photos, things don't look a whole lot different, in some ways than they did in 1842 when they founded it. So just a cool place to be. And obviously I always think a lot of it because that's where I started my coaching career. I have a lot of friendships down there, and the athletic director down there, Michelle Ivy, does a really good job. So I'm fortunate we get to go down there and play them, and we'll welcome them back on Saturday after the first doubleheader for sure.
Yeah, that's kind of like going to a place like that. It's kind of like going over to Chickamauga Battlefield when you go through there.
Yeah.
Kind of, time kind of stands still for a little while.
Yeah.
I visited not too long ago. Hadn't been there in years, but I went many times as a kid. But when you go back over there, it's just like time stands still. There's a certain peace and a feel about it where you kind of sort of sit back and think about what happened and why you're where you are.
Yeah, it's unique. Marion's always been kind of synonymous, just by proximity with Selma, and in a lot of ways, I think those towns. It's kind of sad to see, people forget. They have a lot of history there, but it kind of gets forgotten when you go down there. Yeah. There's not, and I get they're not on. They've seen their better days. It's not. It's not high agrarian times like it was 150 years ago, but there's a lot of lessons there. And if you're a history guy like myself, it's fun to see. And Marion's unique, to the 2-year system because, not a lot of schools have a 2-year junior college in their system. And, obviously it does a lot for the military, but not only that, just our workforce in general. So fun trip, unique trip. And, we're excited to go down there for sure.
Well, one more question I want to ask you, and then I'll let Randy ask you a few. What are your expectations of this team? This is year number 2. Last year, a lot of a learning process. And, of course, you said it, the goal is to win a national championship. And, you can't do it if you don't dream it. But really, what are the expectations for this softball team?
Our goal is still to do that. We want to win a national title. I think this team is capable of it, but really that's a goal. It's kind of a result-oriented deal. The biggest thing for us is just to continue to improve on the things that we're not, we're not doing as well as I feel like we're capable of doing, which they have, since they've showed up in August, have done, and exceeded that. So, that's really our goal. I want to make sure, from a personnel standpoint, that we get as many looks as we can. Don't get me wrong, we're trying to win this time of year, but we also want to make sure that we're winning our roster for May, meaning that I don't want to leave any stone unturned, by the time we get into postseason and wonder, well, what if this person did that? I learned that from Jerry Glasgow, who's at Texas Tech. We were at Louisiana one year and he did something Jerry's known for doing just crazy off the wall stuff. We were on the road playing Georgia State and we were having it was like a midweek practice on the road. We had played Florida State and then we're going to play Georgia State after that and then head back to Louisiana. And he decided at the end of the practice to take like our 6 pitchers and have them do a home run derby just for fun. And I remember at the end of it going, okay, that's fine, whatever. This is kind of a waste of time. Well, Carrie Boswell gets up and she's hitting the ball better than any starter we probably had. And both of us looked at each other like, huh. And Jerry being Jerry, he inserted Carrie Boswell in the lineup as a DP. And she ended up being our 8-hole hitter that year. And we went to a regional final and we never would have known that, had Jerry not, had the foresight to you just, again, that's how he was. Any kind of stone we can turn over to figure out the best way to formulate this team toward winning, he was going to do. And, I learned a lot, in that instance. So, and he did that a lot early in the year. We were juggling lineups and doing different things to make sure that we knew what we had, to hit full throttle at the end of the year. And that's one thing about Jerry. Any team I've ever been on when I was there or since, they have always played their best ball at the end of the year, always. And that's why I will always tell people, Jerry's that guy, I might go from A to Z in a straight line. He's going to go in every crazy diagonal way there is. But he's probably going to get there as faster than anybody else. But they always play well at the end. I've been with him 3 times. Every single time we played our best ball at the end. And I think that's a testament to his coaching, and that's what we're all trying to do, and I think he's really successful at it because I can't think of any team he's had that hasn't been the sharpest at the end. So, that's what we're trying to get toward. We want to be Miss May, not Miss March. So, that's kind of where we're headed.
Yeah, I understand. Randy, I'll let you take over.
Coach, I just got one question for you. And you talked about the on the field, the technology level. Do you find it's also necessary to almost do classroom type work with the team early in the year to install your defense and move forward? So you've got multiple levels of training the same thing.
Yeah, and we've even gone as far as, a lot of our kids are familiar with like Canvas is what we use, in the state of Alabama to, for like dual enrollment, online type classes. And, so all of our kids have a familiarity of that, whether they were a dual enrollment kid prior to coming here or whether that's, an online class that they had to take when they were here. So we just created a softball class out of that. So it has every, this is something Hunter Beach and I came up with years ago when we were at UAB during COVID. There are written diagrams of most of what we do, but there are also voiceover teaches into that. So like if they don't understand our cuts and relay system, you just go on to the Canvas class, you go down to the module where we've got cuts and relays review and they can click a voiceover. That's something that's really unique to our program. Hunter and I were playing with that about 6 years ago. We were together for a while, obviously up until 23. And then in the last 3 years since we've been away, he and I have talked about that. He does it through a program called Teamworks. We do ours through Canvas, but it's essentially the same thing where you're creating a digital handbook, a classroom more or less for softball that the kids have access to all the time. and hopefully they're utilizing that as much as they can. But they've got access to it, and with
Right.
that comes a high standard of, what else really can you ask for in terms of having the ability to be prepared for practice and games. So that's something that's really good that we've been able to, been fortunate to be able to use, that I think has been a great teaching tool for us.
Absolutely, Coach. I could listen to you talk about sports and in your sport, but other sports too. I just love listening to you describe what has got to happen, and no, about 9 days from now, it's no longer describing. You got to go out in the field and play it.
Yeah, and I think we're kind of to that point, like everybody is. You're just ready to get going, and we need to see what we need to improve on. We're going to do some things well, and we're going to do some things not very well. And we've got to get a hold of the things we're not doing well as soon as possible and correct them, to get where we need to go. Because I think the sky's the limit with the team, but I don't really want to get caught up in that as much as I do. How fast are we improving? How fast are we able to recognize what we're not doing well, and how fast can we get over that and improve? And I think if we do that, the goals like the championships, take care of themselves. But I certainly that's what we want to shoot for.
Also, Coach, before we leave, we need a college sports commissioner. You're kind of a Saban follower. He'd make a good one, I think.
It's not for me. I think he had the right idea when he got out, when he did, because I don't, and I say this non-emotionally, and I hope that I'm wrong, but if I were betting on it right now, it's almost like it needs to fall for it to get better.
Absolutely.
Because we're so far. And I don't even put that on the NCAA in a lot of ways. I think the courts have a lot to do with it, and I think there's a lot of things to it. It's kind of like, I don't even want to open up the can of worms, and I know you guys had on the show earlier about public and private schools. It's kind of like that issue. There's in the sense that it's not a cut and dry deal. I've heard some really good arguments from both sides of that. And I'm not a high school guy, but certainly it's not an easy. I don't think that's an easy answer there. The NCAA is about 40 times more complicated than that right now. And the biggest thing is in the coaching profession, nobody really knows how to plan. What does your 5-year plan look like? I think in any business you need that. How do you do that when nobody knows what the next 5 minutes is going to look like?
That's it.
And I think that's a real disservice to the coaches, to the administrators, to the presidents, to everybody, the athletes that are involved. And we need to fix it. I mean, as somebody that spent most of their life in it, we do. But I don't know that I'm the guy to do it. I just have my opinions like everybody else. So we'll see.
It's going to take involved a lot.
I think the Athletic Association is headed in the right direction in that they are to that point to where now they can compromise. And that's what they have to do. They got to set it down, compromise, and get it fixed the right way. College sports, our federal government, it may have to collapse before it's going to get better, because nobody can agree on which way the right way is to go. And that's what America is now. I get frustrated with the company I work for because they never have a plan B. They have a plan A, but they never have a plan B. And I get so frustrated that we don't do that. And, that's the way society has gotten.
Yeah, well, and I'll say this, I certainly have a lot more faith in our state and our state legislators than I do the guys at the federal level. I mean, it's, I've heard people say that we just need Congress to get involved. And I thought, they don't have a great track record of doing anything else, guys. I mean, so I don't, that may be the last group you really want to get involved. So
yes,
I don't know. We'll see.
Hey, Phil, just want to make one announcement now. We're going to move back to Monday night, starting the 2nd with Coach. So we'll have him on the 2nd and the 16th, and we'll get him back.
I think it's the 9th.
Okay. Is it the 9th?
Yeah, it's the 9th.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be 2
9th
weeks
and the
from yesterday.
23rd.
Yeah, the 9th. Yes, yes.
9th and 23rd, and then
Yeah.
we'll be opposite of that. So then as we get farther into the season, we'll either kick up or whatever we need to do, but we'll be here for the whole journey.
Okay. Well, sounds good, guys. I appreciate you guys having me on, and appreciate what you do for our community and beyond, and and certainly for Northeast Alabama softball. So thank you very much for having us.
Coach, a
Well,
lot
our
of people
plan is,
care.
Coach, I'm kind of trying to sort of set it up as, after your show next, in 2 weeks, is to kind of have a couple of players on after your show of Northeast. So,
Yeah.
kind of get them in. And I think Jada's one of the ones that we may have on, but
Good.
kind of get that squared away. Give them a little voice, give them a little bit of PR, because I think it's good for them.
Yeah. Maybe if you guys ask them directly, you'll have more success than I have. They get shy when I do it. The only time I've had success doing it, whether it was your show or others, is kind of blasting them with it like right there. We had a media group that showed up in August, and they didn't have a choice. They just walked right into it. And I said, "Hey, by the way, the camera's rolling. You're on." So they couldn't wiggle out of it. But if they do have that, if you can just, if you grab them, because I agree. I think it's important. It's a good skill just to, give them a chance to communicate about something they've obviously put a lot into, and we're proud of them and want them up there. So
Yes, sir.
That'd be good.
And Coach, we've already figured out pitchers and place kickers are all crazy. So we just kind of accept them as we go. So
No doubt. Well, good deal. Well, I appreciate it again, guys.
Appreciate it, Coach.
Me. Yeah.
Hey, and a lot of people very interested in this program, second year.
Good.
Want to see it on the field. So for Phil Harris, for Randall Cunningham, for Coach Guthrie, we'll be back on the 9th. And maybe have some players afterwards. Good night. God bless.